So I want to welcome everybody to this webinar. We're going to share what you need to know about the new Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Rule. This is really an important topic for funders who are concerned about issues of racial justice and inequality and how they manifest in place. What we're seeing all around the country is we're very concerned with growing concentrated poverty, economic and racial segregation, and gentrification and displacement, and these are all symptoms of structural inequality and discrimination. And they're the result of a system where low-income people and communities of color are left out of the decision-making and the projects that define neighborhoods and the places where they can afford to live. So now, and what we'll hear about today, under this new rule, every jurisdiction that receives federal funds from HUD, every city, every county, public housing authority, and state will now have to begin to look at how these challenges are playing out and engage their community in setting priorities to address them. So foundations especially have a very unique and essential role to play in how this rule is implemented, and especially in helping to set the table for strong community participation and shared decision-making. This webinar is, I wanted to mention, this webinar is a part of the Neighborhood Funders Group new Democratizing Development for People program, which is building the capacity of philanthropy to support the power and voice of those who have been oppressed and excluded by profit-based and discriminatory development practices and policy, and to be at decision-making tables and develop alternative solutions. So we'll talk about this at the end, but I really encourage everyone to come to the NFG conference in Oakland in June, where there'll be lots of opportunities to get further engaged with this program. So today we're going to hear from advocates and community leaders and our Assistant Secretary at HUD, who's overseeing the rollout of this rule, and from folks in philanthropy. So to get us started, I'd like to welcome Kalima Rose from PolicyLink as our first speaker. She's going to share with us more about the history and the current context that make this rule so important. Kalima?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Amy. So I just wanted to give some brief background comments on the rule, and if you could go to my first slide. The Obama administration's approach to developing this new rule came in the context of America's changing demographics, where we are becoming a growing majority of people of color in the country. Our most populous state of California is already majority people of color. You can see the 2010 bar where the last census showed that we surpassed it. If you could go to the next slide, you see that the U.S. is headed that direction as well. And in 2040, we will be majority people of color. And the rule is meant to play a critical role in reducing the disparities faced by people of color in life expectancy and prosperity outcomes. If you go to the next slide, you can see that why we need the rule is built on a history where the administration was considering the legal, lending, and land use decisions that enforce segregation through racial covenants, urban renewal. If you go to the next slide, the history of redlining advanced by the federal government in 1935 when the Federal Home Loan Bank drove the creation of residential security maps that redlined communities of color as loan risks and denied credit and mortgages. If you go to the next slide, you can see that the same map of Cleveland where the redlining exists, this is a 2010 map that shows where foreclosures happened in the Cleveland community. And so history does have a way of repeating itself. And finally, if you go to the next slide, these redlining and other policies giving mortgages for people to move to, whites to move to the suburbs, have created generational disinvestment in these communities that are really the heart of the life expectancy disparities that are experienced in these communities. So HUD decided in looking at the how the Fair Housing Act was performing, if you could go to the next slide, that they wanted to bring together data to provide to their grantees to be able to consider how these legacies of segregation and poverty were playing out so that they could plan to use their resources to better intervene in the disparities. If you go to the next slide, and what HUD explicitly wants people to do is to look at where these areas of racially and ethnically concentrated poverty exist. And so you can see those are called out in this map of the St. Louis area, and that over 14 million people in America live in these recaps, and there's over 4 million children in them, if you go to the next slide. And so what HUD wanted people to do was to set more diverse tables than had previously looked at fair housing analyses of impediments, and have them look at this data together to think about how they could bring their diverse authorities and capacities to addressing these legacy challenges. If you go to the next slide, HUD decided to pilot the rule in the Regional Sustainable Communities grants, and so 74 regions did these pilots and used the data. And so this is St. Louis's, and you can see where their racially concentrated areas of poverty are. The inset above in green is where African Americans are concentrated. And if you go to the next slide, you can see that when St. Louis did this analysis, they decided to prioritize connecting those communities better through transit and doing better job training and connection for the African American communities that were facing economic disparities. If you go to the next slide, you can see many of the regions that participated took on these kinds of goals. So Chicago, Eugene, Oregon, the Twin Cities, which Gary will address, the Puget Sound, really diverse kinds of economies. And if you go to the next slide, they all took on thinking about how to reinvest in their high poverty communities, how to expand mobility to higher opportunity neighborhoods, and how to protect communities of color from displacement. And so with that, I would like to turn to Assistant Secretary Gustavo Velasquez, who is the Assistant Secretary for Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity, who is one of the chief leaders of the implementation of this rule at the agency. Assistant Secretary?
Thank you very much, Kalima, for the introduction. Thank you for everything that Policy Link is doing. Same to you, Amy. Thank you for everything that the Ford Foundation is doing in addressing the issue of our time, which is inequality, and for coming up with strategies and partnerships to addressing this issue. I want to echo what has been said already. Our nation is facing many significant challenges, from rising concentrations of poverty, particularly in minority communities, to a shortage of affordable housing, to disinvestments in blighted neighborhoods, to growing levels of racial and economic segregation. I think we are, I hope we're all familiar with a recent body of research and evidence that has placed these issues front and center of the national and local discourse. And these are no easy solutions, of course. These issues, after all, didn't develop overnight. So we know that correcting them will take a lot of time. But we believe here at HUD and the federal government, the Obama administration, that the AFFH regulation that we announced last year represents a realistic and obtainable chance to creating more communities of opportunity where all families are able to build a better life. More importantly, this is a federal legal obligation. Just by way of background very quickly, when the 1968 Fair Housing Act passed by Congress, it not only focused on enforcement, That was an important part of it, to providing redress and justice for people subjected to direct housing discrimination. The 1968 Fair Housing Act also did something just equally important. It required that cities, counties, states, everyone receiving federal taxpayer dollars would take proactive or affirmative steps to create inclusive communities, to reverse decades and decades of residential segregation that was crushing communities from enabling reach better height, better opportunities. So the rule that we announced further requires, 48 years after the Fair Housing Act passed, emphasizes this long-standing legal obligation and requires that program participants, funding participants, take meaningful actions to overcome historic patterns of segregation, promote fair housing choice, and foster inclusive communities that are free from discrimination. In addition to creating greater housing choice, which is what fair housing is, creating housing choice for everyone in our country, the new rule will also help local governments strike a strong balance. I'll talk a little bit about this more in a minute, but it really is a balanced approach that we are emphasizing through this regulation between providing low-income families with greater mobility to areas of higher opportunity and also reinvesting in older, distressed neighborhoods on the other hand. This is, again, a balanced approach that is purposefully embedded in this rule. More important, the rule represents the opportunity for cities, housing authorities, or local public entities receiving HUD funding to partner together. Issues such as segregation are not confined, as we all know, by jurisdictional boundaries, so it makes sense to develop regional approaches to tackling fair housing challenges. And I believe that by joining forces and working with regional partners, not only will jurisdictions save resources and minimize duplication of efforts in implementing this rule, but they will also have the added benefit of ensuring that the fair housing goals that they choose are consistent, are collaborative, and are innovative. And HUD will be here to support program participants every step of the way. This is not just an initiative from the Office of Fair Housing. It is a true departmental effort. It was a department-wide effort that created a rule, and the initiative is embedded in HUD's career leadership, particularly in our many offices throughout the country, so that it continues to be a priority for the years to come. So beyond January 20th, 2017, when the President leaves office. Now, when I say, one important aspect of this, one important requirement of this rule is the development of an assessment of fair housing. An assessment of fair housing is a document that replaces something we used to call analysis of impediments to housing choice. Now, this is a critically important document that we have a calendar of development implementation for the next 4 to 5 years, where thousands and thousands of these program participants will develop this assessment. Now, we will provide data. It is important that this planning framework, fair housing planning framework, is available to all program participants with data, with training, with technical assistance, and extra, by the way, technical assistance will be available for those participants engaged in regional collaboration. Now, when I say data in the AFFH context, I'm referring to, layer after layer. I believe we have a map posted in the presentation of the Cleveland region, and that is just an example of what the AFFH data mapping geospatial tool looks, where you will have the availability of looking at information by race, ethnicity, persons with disabilities, all the protected groups under the Fair Housing Act. It provides you information about racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty. It provides you opportunity indices for school proficiency, jobs proximity, labor market engagement, transportation costs, environmental health. It just gives you a wealth of information that will be able for these cities and regions to have a robust, informative analysis of what are the impediments to more opportunity to housing choice. Now, we know that it's practically impossible to account for every single factor that could affect access to opportunity, but these assessments of fair housing, these new assessments of fair housing, will have, at a minimum, the following areas of analysis. They will have to analyze integration and segregation patterns and trends based on race, color, religion, familial status, national origins, all the protected groups under the Fair Housing Act. You will have to identify racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty and the factors leading to significant disparities in access to opportunity, as well as identify disproportionate housing needs also by all these groups protected by law. Not only that, this assessment will include an identification of fair housing goals that each program participant will use to overcome the effect of the contributing factors and related fair housing issues, including a description for those goals in a timeline. As I said in many occasions, the AFFH process is not about infringing on local decision making. Instead, it is about supporting local communities with a planning framework, with data, with training, with technical assistance, so that on their own, they set a plan into place that advances the national policy of fair and inclusive housing. It is also about ensuring that through this rule, there is a lot of participation from the public. Public engagement is a requirement in this rule. This will ensure that no community is left out of the goals that states, cities, and towns will set for meeting their obligation to promote equal housing opportunities. And we believe this is an area where local groups, nonprofit organizations can very much play a part in engaging with those communities and their elected and government officials in order to make these discussions most meaningful. We have developed a number of products that can help program participants to better understand the fair housing challenges in their communities and put the data at their disposal that they need to make so that they can make better informed investment decisions from an equity lens. But more program participants will have the flexibility to develop a variety of fair housing strategies and actions based on those individual assessments. And I start talking about the balanced approach. This is, again, place-based strategies. Again, cities will have to select these strategies that can include maintaining, preserving existing affordable housing stock, or it could also mean mobility strategies that could include affordable housing in areas of higher opportunity to combat segregation, creating housing mobility programs that effectively connect low-income people with better neighborhoods. So that's just some examples of strategies under this balanced approach that cities can select as a result of the developments and submissions of these assessments. That's sort of in a nutshell of what's in the rule, what the rule requires, what we hope the intent, purpose, and the and what we want this rule to accomplish is, again, everything that I've talked goes towards a common goal, accomplishing a common goal, which is expanding housing opportunity and choice in our country for everyone, regardless color of your skin, where you come from, your economic situation. And as we take on today's housing challenges, more than ever, our generation must do its part to give every person who calls America home access to the housing choice and economic opportunity that is needed, again, more than ever to succeed in the country. We have to make sure the United States remains the undisputed land of opportunity, and we believe that AFFH is an equalizer to make sure that that happens for the future of our country and our families. Thank you. Now I want to now turn it over to Gary, who will walk us through some of the pilots that are helping increase opportunities for success in communities across the country. Gary?
Thank you so much.
Gary, I'm going to jump in. We're hearing a lot of background noise, so just another reminder to everybody to please make sure that your phone or your computer, if you're dialed in through your computer speakers, is muted. Thank you very much. Sorry, Gary, go ahead.
I just wanted to thank the Assistant Secretary for that excellent presentation. This rule is really revolutionary, and it has the chance to actually transform this country. And so I don't want to minimize that, given the fact that we had Title VIII of the Civil Rights Act in place for many years without ability to really enforce it. What I want to talk about today is the pilot that we did in the Twin Cities metropolitan area. I'm on the Metropolitan Council. I'm a council member. And the Metropolitan Council is a regional planning body that covers transit. You can move to the next slide, please. It covers the next slide, yeah. Really covers the metro transit and bus system, wastewater treatment, the regional parks, and housing. Next slide, please. The Metropolitan Council really is the regional planning body that coordinates the growth and development of the regions, working with local government on comprehensive plans around all of the various issues that I just mentioned. Please, next slide. When the HUD Sustainable Communities regional planning grants were awarded to our region, we formed what is known as the Corridors of Opportunity. And that was really a combination of both the HUD resources that we got to do this work, as well as the Living Cities Integration Initiative that provided up to $16 million in grants and loans for this program. And really the vision for this Corridors of Opportunity was that transit corridors would guide our region's growth, vitality, and competitiveness. Development along these transit corridors would create distinct places and strengthen local access while increasing ridership and expanding access to jobs, affordable housing, and essential services for residents of all incomes and backgrounds. Next slide, please. So part of what we did was we wanted to make sure that the table that we set and the people that
she's cute. He's cute too. No, that's my nephew, the one that doesn't talk.
I think somebody should mute there. Okay, the table that we set.
Got out of hole.
We wanted to make sure that the table that we set that was inclusive, that included not only the typical players such as government players in the private sector, but also brought people from the community to actually be at the table. So we also had community folks, people working in development, people working in equity. We had philanthropy at the table. And we did that, and philanthropy played a huge role. In fact, at the time, I was the vice president of the Northwest Area Foundation, and we did the initial grant to on the left side of your screen, you see the community engagement team, which was led by the Alliance for Metropolitan Stability, the Minnesota Center for Neighborhoods, Organizing, and Nexus Community Partners. And this group actually went deep into the community to ensure those voices were a part of the overall Corridors of Opportunity process. Please move on. Next slide. And so really what we wanted to do was to ensure, our principles were really to ensure that regardless of your race, economic status, ability, or neighborhood, wherever you lived, that you had access to opportunity, which included livable wage jobs, entrepreneurship, and viable housing choices, and that you would take advantage of all of these opportunity structures that were created or being created in the community through the development that was going on. Next slide, please. And one of the things that we did at the Metropolitan Council as a part of this process of conducting the Fair Housing and Equity Assessment was create a very detailed document that really went into what was going on. And some of the maps that you had seen in the previous iterations in Cleveland, we actually did there. And we had deep conversations with each other, and it was difficult conversations because these patterns and structures of opportunity, of segregation, of equity, of access have been going on a long time in our community. And this report actually started framing the council's agenda in terms of how we would actually think about the regional development guide that we put out. But this was the first document, Choice, Place, and Opportunity. Next slide. So the findings were even more dramatic than any of us thought. Racial and ethnic disparities really threaten the viability of our region, the competitiveness of our region, that we had a suburbanization of poverty, growing racial segregation, growing areas of concentrated poverty, and people of color facing significant barriers to housing choices. Access to opportunity by race and geography were pretty ingrained within our community. Next slide. And so what we came up with is, and this is the Regional Development Framework, otherwise known as Thrive 2040, which actually sets the frame and the principles on how we're going to operate moving forward and begins to set the frame for the comprehensive plans by the local government, cities, and townships within our region, and actually gets at how opportunity is structured. And the 5 outcomes that we came to were stewardship, prosperity, equity became one of the top principles, livability, sustainability. And then the 3 principles were that these things weren't happen in isolation, that they would be integration, collaboration, and accountability. Next slide. So we went through a long conversation about defining equity, both at the corridors of opportunity and within the council itself. And this is our definition of equity, and it really connects all residents to opportunity, creates viable housing, transportation, recreation options for people of all races, ethnicities, incomes, and abilities so that all communities share the opportunity and challenges of growth and change. For our region to reach its full economic potential, all of our residents must be able to access opportunity. Our region is stronger when all people live in communities that provide them with access to opportunity for success, prosperity, and quality of life. And even though this is a small 2 paragraphs, it engendered conversations that had never happened before in the community, both on the ground with the grassroots, in the boardrooms, in the council meetings. And some of those were heated discussions. Some of them people started to wake up that our futures are inexplicably tied as one if we're going to make it as a community. Please move forward on the slide. So equity investments. So we actually had to do something after we came to this conclusion. We just didn't we didn't get into paralysis by analysis. We actually started acting on this. One of the things that the Metropolitan Council does is a regional solicitation for transportation funding, which distributes over $50 million over 2 years in federal transportation support. We actually started in 2014 solicitation, adding 7% of the points coming from the housing performance scores of the cities where the projects are located. This was very controversial, but at the same time, it was necessary to start moving the needle on changing some of the patterns of housing opportunity and choice within our region. And so then, starting in 2014, solicitations, 3 to 13% of the project points come from equity criteria: benefits of low-income populations, people of color, children, people with disabilities, and proximity to areas of concentrated poverty. More points from those were 50% of the residents are people of color. And again, this certainly was very controversial. It actually, we've now been through a round of this. Most of the objections have kind of melted away because people actually started seeing that all of us, even in the inner ring suburbs and to some degree in the outer ring suburbs, actually benefited from this change in criteria. Please move forward. We also just created, it took almost 2 years worth of work, but we created a equity advisory committee, which is changing how the council actually does its business, where now we have people from the community, appointed from the community, working on a committee with council members to actually have a place where their voices are heard, where all of the issues that the council deals with are dealt with through an equity lens, and that they are able to make recommendations and have advice back to council. When I got on the council 5 years ago, all of our advisory committees, which are very powerful, including transportation, housing, et cetera, there were no people of color on any of our committees. And now we have been able to change all of those committees in the time that I've been there. We've been able to deal with some of the issues with our police force. We've been able to deal with issues of equity and access. And so at the time, I was not very hopeful. Now I'm hopeful that these changes actually are permanent, that they are creating change within the community, and the council actually speaks with one voice around these issues. And so this council and this equity advisory committee is another ingredient that's added to the pot to make sure that everyone's at the table, that we actually are sharing both the benefits and the burden of opportunity and issues of cost to the region. So next slide, please. Oh, and now I want to, and if you want more information, please contact me here. And now I'm going to turn this over to Deidre, who's going to cover the issue of the foundation's role in the AFFH.
Lesnick from Open Society Foundations, and just a quick reminder to please put any questions that you have in the chat box at the bottom right of your screen. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to have a conversation. And thank you so much for inviting me to participate today, and thank you all for being on. I'm planning to talk a little bit about why this is an opportunity now, why this is an urgent something that you could get involved with, how philanthropy can get involved, and what the Open Society Foundations and Ford are doing to get involved, and how we, of course, welcome your involvement in this. But first, I wanted to start off. I know you guys have seen some maps today, but I had a couple that I really thought were compelling that I wanted to share with you. So I'm not sure if you can see my mouse. I can see it, of course, but you can probably all see on the left side of the screen, there's an arrow, basically an arrow shape. This is in Houston. And the black outlined space, those are the strongest real estate markets in Houston. Then the dots, as you can tell, are the blue dots are white, the orange dots are Hispanic, Latino, and the green dots are African American. So you can see first off where everyone is living. And the other things to note here are all these other dots you see around are hazardous waste sites landfills, radioactive sites, actual active sites that are currently emitting poisonous gases, other types of things, and you can also see in the red outlined areas the historic minority neighborhoods. So this was put together by the Texas Low-Income Housing Information Service. This is the kind of map that can really, that could be used in this process that can really make a difference and is extremely, it's pretty obvious what's happening. This is a similar map that you can see the same outline on the left of the strong real estate markets, the white neighborhoods, African American and Latino neighborhoods, very segregated. And then you can see the dots here are where all the public housing is located. So there's public housing, there's project-based Section 8, low-income housing tax credits, and you can see where the city has chosen or other players have chosen to put all of the public housing. This next slide here is just shows the racial makeup of the previous slide of each of the different public housing units. And so this is the kind of analysis that this group did, and in coalition with the Texas Organizing Project and Texas Appleseed, these groups have gotten together with the residents and put together a campaign, which I highly recommend to you. I'm happy to send around the video afterwards. It's about a 5-minute video talking about their campaign, and these are the 4 rights that they put together: the right to stay, the right to choose, the right to equal treatment, and the right to have a say. Pretty straightforward rights and very strong. And you know, there's the mapping issue. The mapping part of this is involved, like we've been talking about, but then you've got the community engagement part that's absolutely critical. So I'm going to leave this up just while I'm talking a little bit. Where you live shouldn't define your life outcomes, but where you live does matter. A child's zip code is the primary predictor. It's the primary predictor of her opportunities in life. And communities that are less segregated and with more public investment in good schools, transportation, provide children more opportunity and the chance for upward mobility. And as Gary just mentioned, we are inextricably tied together in a community. So I realize some of these points have been touched on, but I just wanted to emphasize some of the things that really brought us to this work. When you look at some of the indicators of this, when you talk about zip code, people sometimes, I don't know, not people who aren't quite involved in housing work might not always pay attention, but there's some really compelling indicators I just wanted to flag. Life expectancy, for example. So life expectancy for people in the New Orleans zip code 70124, sorry, which is 93% white, is 80 years. That's compared to a zip code close by that's 87% non-white, 55 years. So that's a 25-year difference in life expectancy. Tooth decay by zip code. In San Francisco, one area code, among white children, 15 to 19% of kindergartners have tooth decay. In another one, 53%, which is the southern portion of Chinatown. 53% of children have tooth decay. Overzealous policing and targeting. This is, you all are very familiar with this. In Sandtown, where Freddie Gray was killed, African-American residents say they feel hunted. They feel hunted by the police. And in a predominantly white area only a mile away, people feel helped by the police and call them when they have problems. So the goals of this new rule, which has been awaited for decades by the civil rights movement, are to enable cities and counties to overcome historic patterns of segregation. This is a quote from HUD. Historic patterns of segregation, promote fair housing choice, and foster inclusive communities that are free from discrimination. And the rule requires cities and counties and states that receive HUD funding to conduct a data-driven analysis of the racial disparities, as Gustavo mentioned, and looking at housing, education, transportation, infrastructure. And not only that, but to come up with a plan of how they're going to address these disparities. And also what's to note also is how the plan then leads to the actual carrying out of the investments in the community, so the consolidated plan process, which actually is the use of the funds itself. So it can really be, it really can make a huge difference. So all these issues that we met for communities of color and low-income communities are issues that cut across housing, transportation, jobs, the environment, and many other things. But often the topics are treated separately with different campaigns. But look at the example of Texas. It's a great example of different groups getting together and addressing this together. And that's really where philanthropy can start to get involved. This can be a game-changing reg. This can be a game-changing way that HUD is doing business, but we really need engagement by philanthropy, by communities, by jurisdictions, and by governments just to make this a success. And the way I often think of it is that AFFH can be a leverage. It can be a campaign that's, a tool that can be part of existing campaigns that are already out there in the community. One thing I really wanted to note in how philanthropy get involved is that, HUD has put a lot of resources to this, but there are actually no funds available for community participation in this reg. So that is someplace that is a critical need. Another thing that you all know as funders, you already know this, that you really have the power to bring people together, including government agencies and local groups, to get those conversations started. Some of the stuff that Gary was talking about, really getting people to the table and talking about these issues. And there are, there are a lot of strategies out there. There are lots of groups you probably all know about that have ideas of how to get at these long-standing systemic issues. So a little bit quickly about what OSF and Ford are thinking about doing. We're especially interested in engaging in the public engagement and public participation piece of the rule. We hope that this has long-term impacts on the capacity of communities of color to engage in and shape development-related decisions and investments and to hold government accountable. We really welcome your partnership, as I said. So the 4 things that we're focused on are some local investments. So we're thinking about investing in a few of the select places in this first round of jurisdictions. There's a group of jurisdictions going forward actually this year in 2016 and then subsequent years. So right now we're looking at 2016 and 2017. We also are investing in some national groups to bring some expertise to fill any gaps that might be out there and then also to learn from the local groups. We hope to have a pool of funds potentially that would be available for mapping and research and, bringing in organizing groups for trainings and that type of thing. And also we do want to engage elected officials in this process and provide support to the field to do that either through organizations that represent elected officials and public officials and or to local community groups to weigh in on this. So my final point, which I've kind of made a couple of times, but I just really wanted to emphasize, is that data is extremely key, but it's not all that matters. And this is really a chance to reach across silos and reach across the lines, that some of these lines that sometimes exist between advocates, academics, community leaders, and government and officials. And an opportunity for communities of color who know their communities best to weigh in and help shape policy. Thank you very much. I'll turn it back over to Amy.
We're gonna turn to some Q&A now, just a bit of a discussion. We've got a couple questions that are on the. Sorry, I'm hearing feedback. Thank you. So keep your questions coming on the chat in the webinar. That's really helpful. Can we start with a couple of questions, just some clarification questions about the rule and who is responsible for conducting an assessment of fair housing? One question we have is, could you clarify which entity or jurisdiction is responsible for coming up with the fair housing plan? How would a funder know who to contact and also when the jurisdictions that they're working in would be coming up to do an assessment of fair housing so they can start to prepare?
So thank you. This is Gustavo. The way that the assessment calendar, the way it works is based on each jurisdiction's planning cycle. So for entitlement jurisdictions, so jurisdictions receiving, for example, CDBG or home funds, that are entitlement jurisdictions, they are required to submit a 5-year consolidated plan. And the submission of the assessment of fair housing happens 270 days before the submission of the consolidated plan. It works in a similar fashion for a public housing authority, although the program cycles are never synced, even if you have a housing authority in a city in the same location. It's just, it's very complicated, but that's just the way it works. Planning cycles are all over the map for jurisdictions even in a similar region. Now, so the calendar is, we start this fall with 22 entitlement jurisdictions that have to submit, including among them the city of New Orleans, Kansas City, Missouri. We have a lot of smaller towns and counties. The number of jurisdictions increases considerably to over 100 in 2017, including some important cities like Boston, Denver, LA. And then by 2018, we're talking about thousands because now it includes the states, it includes housing authorities. Now, if a region decides to submit together as a region, then the rule calls for the selection of a lead entity. So someone has to submit on behalf of the region. Of course, every jurisdiction is responsible. There will be a regional analysis, but every jurisdiction is responsible for selecting their individual goals to affirmatively further fair housing. But there will be one, this is a bit bureaucratic, one entity that will be based on its planning cycle submit as a lead entity, and the other jurisdictions in the region will have to just tag along that lead entity. Again, there are many details involved here. I'm just kind of giving you a high level. The list of jurisdictions we can circulate. That's one thing that is not posted online yet. We are getting information that kind of changes almost on a daily basis. But we now have a list that we have compiled for 2016, 2017, and 2018 that we can make available by email after the call.
Great, thank you, Gustavo. That list will be really helpful for funders to see if the places that they're focused are going to be engaging in this process in 2016 or 2017. Kalima, could you, most of the folks on the call are either from philanthropy or nonprofits, and the rule itself is a requirement for jurisdictions, but we know that for it to be successful, it will require strong community participation and linking the assessment of fair housing and the priority setting to the priorities of the community and the campaigns, whether they be for affordable housing or transit. That's going to be really essential. And so in Gary's example, which was a really great story from the Twin Cities, you've got the Met Council, and you have leaders like Gary who've been part of the philanthropic community and part of the Regional Council of Governments. But for folks that are in other places where maybe there's not as strong a regional approach or as much of a familiarity and willingness to have these tough equity conversations, where would you suggest that funders and or nonprofits start?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. So PolicyLink was providing equity-focused capacity-building support to the Sustainable Communities grantees, and we got to interact with the Twin Cities on numerous occasions. But in one of those, Gary was actually hosting a dinner for equity leaders to understand what the fair housing assessment was and the ways that they could weigh in and recruit other leaders from the communities that were facing greater disparities in their life outcomes. And so I think that's one role that we saw philanthropy play in many places was that both acting as a convener with the community development groups that they fund and who represent racial equity in the region, so that they were knowledgeable. They often gave them grants to allow their participation along with the paid staff of the public agencies who were doing the work, and to do major outreach events to just the regular residents of various communities in the region or the cities that were doing these studies, these assessments. And so always the organizing networks who were leading the transportation equity or the housing justice or climate justice campaigns were invited to those tables. And so in the Bay Area, they formed a kind of similar community advisory council, as Gary described, that the Twin Cities set up, and they looked at the underlying housing policies in every jurisdiction, and then they decided to launch campaigns based on that to bring more of the housing policy resources to the jurisdictions that lacked them. And so it has really resulted in a region-wide anti-displacement work, and we see that following up on that, there are county-level impact fees to go to affordable housing trust funds and county affordable housing bonds happening in every county as an outcome, and that was really driven by the equity advocates that participated in the assessment. So I think I would just say that because any of the funders that are members of a neighborhood funders group, you would have a great lead on which organizations should be involved, how you could use your convening power and your funding power to engage those groups so that there's very strong assessments and goals, and then alignment of both public and private resources with those goals.
Great. We've got another question from Diana, and I think it might be the last question we have time for, though if folks keep typing in questions, like we can capture them and figure out how to follow up. But so Diana writes her questions about the larger picture into which AFFH fits, and specifically about money. So we're in an era of where we're shrinking public resources, and so even if a community identifies these trends and decides that they want to place more affordable housing in areas of high opportunity, where's the money come from to do that? Overall, there's a crisis in funding affordable housing nationally. We see that very clearly. So could someone speak to how AFFH is connected to or not connected to this larger problem of public resources? I don't know.
Sure, I mean, I can start.
Jump in.
Yes, I can start, and then maybe someone else wants to. But you know, money is obviously a big factor here. I often travel to the high-cost cities, and when I talk about AFFH and other fair housing issues, many people say, well, it's great to hear what the administration is doing around fair housing, but what about just housing period, the need for more affordable housing? So we understand, you know, there are jurisdictions that are lucky to have, for example, locally appropriated housing production trust funds that can supplement federal or state dollars. Some states have actually come up with some innovative strategies to pump more affordable housing production money into localities. But the one thing I'd say is, you know, when you think of AFFH, you think about, first of all, a wide range of strategies that you can undertake. And within those strategies, you can think of short-term and long-term. And money, just like for everything else, is only an important factor, is not the entire solution. I often refer to policies and practices at the local level that can further fair housing, and these are not issues that are subject to money. We talk about zoning and land use policies, for example, that could advance the efforts of localities to further fair housing that jurisdictions may consider as part of the general AFFH strategy. So yeah, I think we're trying to be, we're not trying to be prescriptive through this rule. We're just trying to say with the community, come up with solutions that can be short, long term, and that some obviously money facilitates solutions in a speedy way, but there are many other things that you may consider. That's why the balanced approach and the long-term look at what AFFH can be achieved in your communities.
And Amy, I'd just say one more thing, that because over 1,400 jurisdictions are going to be going through these assessments in the next 5 years, and everyone will find that only 1 in 4 people who needs housing assistance gets it, and that housing cost burdens are increasing, I think we can think of it as a way to build public will for increasing resources to these issues, not just locally or in the state, but also making a case for the federal government, because these assessments are showing that growing need.
Great. Gary, do you have want to give you a chance to weigh in if you've got
Thank
any?
you.
Thank
you. I think this issue of resources is always going to be an issue because of the subsidies required to build affordable housing. However, in the Twin Cities, since we've started working on this, a number of the cities are now either contemplating or have enacted inclusionary zoning policies that require, when developments get developed, that they actually include affordable housing with the development itself. So I think the fact that communities are now waking up that they've got a problem to be solved, as opposed to sticking their head in the sand and hoping it goes away, I think that's starting to happen. I do think Kalima is correct that the fact that we have been able to demonstrate this issue in a very methodical way has actually built the case for both state action and other action around these issues. How much resources will be applied is still up for grabs, but it's certainly on the agenda now where it wasn't before.
Great. Well, thank you very much, everybody. This is all the time we have. I want to get us off at 2 when we said. But I want to, in terms of next steps and how to stay engaged in learning about this rule, how it applies to the places that you're each working in. So I want to encourage everybody to, again, come to the Oakland convening of the Neighborhood Funders Group. It's going to be a great program. The Democratizing Development for People program will be very much a part of the conversation. So whether you want more information about the Democratizing Development Program or about AFFH and how to get more information or partner with other funders like that are interested in helping make sure that it's implemented in your community, I encourage you to reach out, send an email to Niall. He's the new senior manager for the Democratizing Development Program at NFG, and his email address is niall@nfg.org. He's fantastic, and so really encourage you to reach out and let Niall know if this is an issue you want to delve deeper into and be engaged with. So with that, I think we can wrap, and feel free to reach out to me as well if you have any questions. Amy at the Ford Foundation, but Niall will be the point person for the Democratizing Development Program. NFG folks, Niall, Kita, anything else we need before we all sign off?
I just want to say thank you. This is Niall at NFG. Thank everybody for participating on the webinar. It was really informative, and I look forward to next steps. Thank you.